Hello and welcome to this episode of Akrinos Access. I'm your host, Eric Matei, joined today by Ken Jorgenson. Ken is the National Account Director with our good friends over at CARR Realty. And y'all, we've got a really great episode today as Ken and I are going to be talking all about healthcare real estate. Really, like healthcare real estate for modern ECPs. How do you optimize your location and your lease? We're going to touch on a lot of really cool, informative things, everything from data to negotiations to sealing that deal to get you on that profitable path in your practice. But for starters, Ken, thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of Akrinos Access.
Thanks for having us. We've been looking forward to it since we got it set up. So it should be a good conversation today.
Fantastic. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Let's just start really high level, Ken. You know, I know we were talking a little bit before going live here that, you know, there's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misinformation out there just regarding exactly what does the real estate process look like for, you know, so let's take any one of our listeners out there that's in any town in America. Maybe they're looking to start a practice, maybe looking to relocate their practice, or even just like negotiate their existing lease. Why don't we start this conversation by just walking through the process? What does the process look like in finding and securing a location?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And just like when you're driving around your neighborhood and you see like the signs that come in, we just had one for a Costco down the road that's getting ready to be built, and you see the signs for a while and you're like, the signs have been sitting there for months and I haven't seen any movement. But what you don't know is there's a lot of planning and discussion and demographics and reporting and competition analysis and vision, trying to figure out what the perfect plan would be and strategy would be to employ for the vision for your practice. There's a lot of work that goes into it before you just jump in the car and start driving properties. So, to kind of broad overview, walk through what that looks like. You're going to want to, when we sit down with a client, we're asking a number of questions in terms of what kind of practice are you looking at growing? What kind of patient base are you looking at serving? What are some of your life patterns, traffic patterns? What's the vision that you have for your practice? And then also even down to the nuts and bolts. What are some of the space needs? How many rooms? What are the length? All of the different questions in terms of what you think you're going to need now. And then obviously we want to make sure that you don't get pigeonholed into something that you're going to be outgrown in 2 years, right? So we've got to kind of cast something that we can see makes sense for you today, but gives you opportunity to expand, grow, and have some margin down the road. So we're going to have that conversation. And then at that point, we're going to go to the market. You need to realize that there are commercial real estate is very different than residential real estate. So it's not like Zillow. When we bought a house a couple of years ago, you can hop on Zillow and put in your parameters. And I get like emails every day. I still get them saying, hey, this house just hit the market, or this house, it meets your criteria. And commercial real estate is just very different. You're not going to get 30 new options every week that just pop up. And so there's a decent amount of due diligence that goes into identifying what is zoned properly and what has the right amount of parking ratios, and where are the neighboring tenants favorable to having an optometry space come into that shopping center, right? So lots of different factors. But then you want to kind of zero in on 5, 6, 7 options, and then go tour them and walk around and drive around and see what the space looks like, and then you kind of negotiate a few at the same time. That's kind of key, and we can talk about that. But you always want to negotiate simultaneously with a number of them, because whoever has the most options in real estate wins. If the landlord has more options, they win. If you have more options, then you win. And so that's crucial, and that's key.
That is, wow, what an opener here. I really want to stress, you unpacked so many really great insights there. The first thing I really want to stress, really, like you said, is that it starts with the analysis, right? And I know we've spoken offline, and look, we collaborate with your the CARR team in markets across the US. And, it starts with that analysis, understanding exactly what the needs are. And I think, to your point, for the doctor, for that entrepreneurial doctor that's ready to get into practice ownership, or for that doctor who is already in practice ownership and looking to make that next move, absolutely understanding the scope of care that you're looking to provide and continue to grow, absolutely understanding the nature of the market, right? You know, we all remember the old was the movie "If You Build It, They Will Come," Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. We live now in a time where we have access to so much data that you don't have to like do it on a wing and a prayer. If I build it, will they come? But rather like just build for the people what they want, and it lies in the data. So I love how you open it there. And then from there, there were a couple interesting things you said, particularly these differences between commercial and residential real estate. Why don't you unpack? I know you commented a couple things there, but let's circle back to that. Why don't you unpack that just a little bit more? Because there are a lot of big differences, and if you're not aware of it, can really kind of find you in a pickle of sorts. So why don't we touch on some of these ways that real estate, that the commercial real estate journey is going to be different from that residential real estate journey?
Well, so that's a great question, and honestly, a lot of it has to do with what I mentioned earlier in terms of like the access to inventory, like how many options are out there, how often those options come up and come across. We were just talking before as well about clients that are want to purchase versus want to lease, and so very different dynamics because we're in real estate, we're in commercial real estate. We pay our bills, we feed our families based on helping clients with their commercial real estate needs. But we're going to be the first one to tell you, don't put your property ahead of your practice. You need to make sure that you have your practice front and center in terms of your overall game plan. Now, I believe in commercial real estate. It should be a part of your portfolio. You should all own commercial real estate, but it doesn't need to be tied to your practice. If you're in a situation, if you're in a big downtown corridor, you're in New York City or LA, or you're in Miami, you can't go into this transaction thinking, well, I own my house, and so it probably makes most sense for me to own my commercial real estate, my practice real estate too. I would never lease. My parents told me, don't ever pay rent because you're just paying the landlord's mortgage. But it's so different in your house. Go ahead and buy that if that's what you want to do. In terms of your commercial real estate, in terms of your practice real estate, you really need to make sure that you're leading with data and numbers. And so looking at like a purchase versus a lease analysis, there's going to be tax implications, there's going to be principal implications, there's going to be all kinds of liabilities that come on you or your practice for owning versus for leasing, especially if you're looking at a cold start. If you're starting up, there's going to be all kinds of concessions that are available to you from the landlord that they help, either whether it's helping you with your build out costs, which could be tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. It could be things like build out time and free rent, where if you buy a building, you're paying that mortgage the month after you close. If you lease a building, you're likely going to get some time where you don't have to pay rent, so you can build that out. And for a startup, a cold start, optometry practice, that can be the difference between make it or break it in that first year or two. Because if you're having to cut mortgage checks while you're in the middle of construction, you're not making any money yet. And so those are going to be some painful payments that you got to make. So there's a lot of differences between commercial and residential, but those are some of the main ones that you can't go into it with the what do we always say? Commercial is much more data driven, not as emotional. Like I want to love my house,
sure,
but I want to make the smartest decision for my practice real estate. I don't need to fall in love with it and have it, meet all those needs that my house would.
Yeah, certainly. So let's drill down a little bit more into these commercial leases and components of the lease, right? Because we all know that it is such a critical decision that can impact so many aspects of the practice. So maybe touch on some of these key areas, these key elements of a lease that doctors should really pay attention to, and also can maybe share some of these experiences. And I know we collaborate with you guys again in markets across the nation, and it's fascinating to see the types of results that the CARR team can get in these negotiations. But before getting into that, maybe just talk about some of these key elements of the commercial lease. It's not like signing that apartment lease when you were in college. There's a whole lot more to signing the lease for your practice. So why don't you speak to some of that, Ken?
Yeah, 100%. So what we always tell people is it's funny because when we get calls from clients, many times they'll say, just tell me how much the building is. What's the rate? What's the term? What's the rate? What's the term? What's the rate? What's the term? They ask that, and that's typically the most important. That's typically what an optometrist is coming to us saying. This is the most important thing. What is the rate? What does the landlord want for that space? What's the term? If the lease transaction came down to, if the most important parts were lease and term, we wouldn't have 70-page leases that we're reviewing for clients. Landlords would not put that much effort, single spaced, 10 or 12 point font. They would not have that many legal clauses if it just came down to rate and term. So while those are important, that's step one of 50 in terms of what you really need to review and what you need to plan on negotiating. So there's all kinds of things that are important to kind of take a look at. I mentioned a couple of them, but obviously the lease rate. What kind of lease is it? If it's a full service lease, then the operating expenses are included. If it's maybe a modified gross lease or a triple net, some of these terms you may or may not have ever heard before, but they can be the difference of thousands of dollars every month in what you owe the landlord based on what kind of lease you have. So a triple net lease, you're going to have a base rent figure you have to pay each month, and then your triple nets, which are kind of the operating expenses, maintenance, common area maintenance, taxes, insurance, things like that. So you're going to want to take a look, obviously, at that rate. But then there are a number of concessions and things that are always negotiable, things like a tenant improvement allowance. And so if you look at, let's say we're looking at a shopping center and there's a great 2,000 square foot space available and it's a vanilla shell, it hasn't been built out, it's the drywall might be up, lighting is in, the air conditioning and heating units are in, but it's kind of a blank slate. You can build out whatever you want to build for your space. Well, what kind of money is the landlord going to bring to the table and help you build that out? That's called tenant improvement allowance. And sometimes they may come back and say, we're not going to do anything. It's your business. But if it's positioned correctly, if you have the right posture and strategy in the negotiation, and you're negotiating with multiple spaces simultaneously, then you have leverage. You have the right position in that negotiation to get the landlord to stretch further. So things like tenant improvement allowance, things like free rent once you open up, because you and I both know that once you start seeing patients, if you're working with insurance, obviously you're not getting paid on day one. You're going to see a number of patients for weeks or months before you start seeing any kind of income or substantial income coming in. And so free rent can be extremely important for our clients. So concessions like tenant improvement allowance, build out time, free rent, the annual escalations, relocation clauses. There's all kinds of legal clauses that need to be reviewed and negotiated with a good commercial real estate attorney as well. But exclusivity, or do you have, if you're going to go and pump a bunch of money into a brand new practice in the shopping center or in this park or whatever, do you have the ability to keep any other vision focused business out of the space, right? And that can be very important, because if you're going to spend hundreds of thousands in build out and marketing and staffing and getting up and running, and then somebody else opens up 3 doors down, that's not ideal in most scenarios. So there's a lot of different components that go into the lease negotiation process, and that's just a few.
I know. No, I know you barely scratched the surface there, but I'll say this: some of these things that you touched on, thinking of like our collaborative work with the CARR team, right? So our starting point is creating these master budgets for practices, right? Creating that full pro forma financial forecast and feasibility analysis. And I'll tell you, Ken, it's awesome whenever we have a collaboration with CARR, because, oh man, you want to talk about that tenant improvement number. You want to talk about some of these terms that can have a significant, I mean, you referenced it, and obviously we see it in our models, right? When we're starting to drill down from these estimates and getting more and more dialed in as negotiations are taking place, it can have a significant impact in the long-term cost of occupancy, and also just the immediate startup. Like, what's it even going to cost? You know, I'm sharing with you before going live, we have another collaboration with you guys out in Atlanta that just signed a lease recently. Well, I mean, thanks to your team, significant tenant improvement allowance, the likes of which is going to save, I mean, in cases upwards of like well into six figures, depending on how you can get these. So to your point, Ken, also knowing how to negotiate, knowing how to have that posture at the table, and also being able to leverage, having your eye. And I think that is not to be overlooked. And really, I hope, you know, such an insightful episode. Something I definitely want our listeners to take away is, don't fall in love with a single commercial location. You're setting yourself up, and I don't mean you're setting yourself up for something suboptimal in that maybe it goes elsewhere and you're heartbroken. But no, I mean, if you're pursuing one location and you don't have this team, an expert that's going to negotiate for you, you said it on the front end, Ken. It's all about options, right? So whoever's got the options is going to win. So again, tenant improvement, really powerful stuff. That free rent period, that's another one as well, man. Another one of these things. Love seeing what professionals, most notably the CARR team, is able to do with these terms. So let's go ahead now and maybe, and I'm realizing, wow, what a marvelous opener here to our conversation, and we're unpacking so many great things. So look, we've touched on some of the mechanics of these leases. Obviously, we all know that, you know, the role of the location, whether cold starting, whether new in ownership, or whether established practice, the role of the location is critical to so many aspects of the business. So let's talk a little bit about how to optimize this, right? So, you know, if we're talking about how can modern ECPs really optimize that location in terms for location, you know, where do they start? How do you identify the need? And maybe to kind of kick off this segment of the conversation, let's talk a little about some of the intel, some of that data that, you know, ECPs should be looking at and reviewing when they're starting to build their plan on their location.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a number of things that, like I mentioned earlier, before you jump in the car and start looking at properties, you need to dive into some of the intel. So the access to good intel and right intel is going to help you make the most informed and strongest decision for you and your practice. So things like market demographic reports. This is going to be data. It's going to be a visualized map as well as a table full of information about the current population. And usually it's going to give you 2023 or 2024 information, as well as a 5-year forecast. Like, where is this population? Maybe I want to be in this zip code or that zip code. Or I know I want to be in North Atlanta, or I want to be in East Miami, or whatever market you're in. You want to look at some of this information so you have a good idea of, is this population growing? Is it decreasing? Is it staying steady? What is the income? What do the income levels look like? What about the population density? Like, are there reasons why the commercial real estate is much more inexpensive here versus over here? And so looking at household makeup, is it important for you to have kids in the household, or more homeowners versus renters, or, you know, all that kind of information comes through these market demographic reports. But then we always say, in addition to that, you want to be looking at some competition mapping. And so you want to have a good idea. You can jump in the car and go drive around and try to identify, the different practices that you can see the signs on easily. But it's very different when you're looking at a map and you have maybe some market information, maybe some income and population density information, and then you overlay that with where the competitors currently lie. Where are there other offices that you may want to be close to, or you may want to stay away from? And so that's very helpful. Even things like insurance mapping and being able to make sure that in these different areas, in these different zip codes, who are the top insurance payers? I want to make sure that I know if 30% of the population here is Blue Cross Blue Shield or whatever, that or Vision, whatever the insurance payers are, that I am that I'm working with them, that I'm in network, that I'm in their plan. And so some of that information is really helpful for clients to look at. But then even things beyond that, as we start talking through, which I think is kind of where you're going in terms of lay out kind of this process, that's all kind of pre-searching, pre-tour, and before we actually start getting in. But once we've toured a few locations, the goal when we tour clients is not that you like the 7 locations that we are looking at. The goal is that you really like 1 or 2, maybe 3. And then even if you just say, Ken, I only like that one property, our team is, and any good commercial agent, whether you use CARR or somebody else, what they really need to be doing is like, hey, I know, Doc, you love this one, but I need you to throw me in 2 or 3 others. And the reason for that is I can't get you the concessions that are available to you on the space you really want if I don't have the leverage of options and having a couple of other backups. And so we always love negotiating with 3 or 4 properties simultaneously. And then you can see this space is offering this landlord's offering this. And it can literally be the difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars over a 5 or 7 or 10-year term. That can be dramatic. And, most of the CPAs that are out there tell us the real estate costs are typically the second highest fixed expense for optometry practices. So the second highest fixed expense. So if you make a mistake in the real estate line item for your practice, it can be detrimental to the profitability and the growth plan and to your future success as a practice owner.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, to take that a step further also, Ken, and to kind of share some of how we collaborate with the CARR team, right, is that, in our models that we do in our financial forecast and feasibility analysis, part of the business foundations, we then provide this tool to doctors, right? So it's always exciting to see whenever a member of the CARR team is a part of the project, it's really cool to see our clients going into the sandbox, right? Because we don't just give a report. It's a living, breathing, right? We can create different scenario analyses, but it's always exciting to see actually plugging in the numbers from some of these different analyses, because where the CARR team, amazing insights that you guys have put around the real estate piece, we then plug that into the practice at large. And wow, to your point, Ken, you look at the impact of this stuff over a 10-year period of time, and it can be really significant to the practice. So let's, man, what an episode here. We're off to some really great episodes here recently, where just amazing conversations like this, where we notice the time is, wow, where'd the time go? So to kind of pull things together, Ken, why don't you share a little bit, because this has been tremendously insightful, and I'll invite all of our viewers, definitely check out CARR's got a lot of amazing resources over at their site, www.carr.us. But to kind of bring it on home, Ken, why don't you share a little bit about CARR, and the nature of the work you all do, and maybe preface that with a little bit about your background and your expertise around this.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So we are, I'm not exactly sure when you might be seeing this, if it's showing up live in your feed now, or it'll be in a few weeks, but in about 3 weeks from now, so early to mid February, we will be, our company CARR will be celebrating 15 years. So 15
Awesome.
years of helping serve healthcare providers. And so what we did early on, our founder, Colin Carr, was working for one of the big commercial real estate firms. And like 95% of the commercial agents out there was representing landlords as well as tenants and buyers as well as sellers. And so he was representing both sides of the transaction, which is the case for 95% of the commercial brokerage firms out there. And what he kept seeing happen over and over and over was when an optometrist, when a healthcare provider would call his number, which was on the side of the building, it was a shopping center or a building, and it had his name and phone number. When they would call in and say, I want information on leasing this property, and he would go back to his client, who he has a fiduciary responsibility to, the landlord would always say, oh, it's a healthcare provider. Okay, put them at, whatever it is, $30 a square foot. And that happened over and over and over. And he started realizing optometrists, dentists, healthcare providers are getting taken advantage of because what landlords would say, they can afford it, right? And so where that kind of got to him about 15 years ago, and he was like, I'm not feeling great. These people get into their practice, into their industry because they have a love for helping people, and they are the ones getting the most taken advantage of. And so about 15 years ago, he said, I'm going to draw a line in the sand. I'm going to go start my own firm, and all I'm going to do is represent healthcare tenants and buyers. So for 15 years, that's all we've been doing. We've got a team of agents across the country. We're licensed in all 50 states. And so we help these healthcare providers with the research they need, the reports, the analysis, the competition mapping, the lease versus purchase or lease comparison analysis, all of the market demographics we help our clients with. And then we go tour, we negotiate on those spaces. So we've got a team of about 160-ish around the country, coast to coast, licensed in all 50 states. And that's kind of our MO. If I could say one quick thing, and that would be that just with Colin's story that I just shared there, if I can leave you with one piece of advice, it would be that you do not call listing brokers. It's you don't drive around on the weekend thinking I'm going to go find my commercial real estate. You don't need to use CARR, although we would be honored if we could have a conversation. But you need to use somebody, whether it's CARR or another commercial real estate firm. And the reason is because when you call that number on the side of the building, what you don't realize is that broker is his client, her client is the landlord. So their fiduciary is to the landlord to get the highest lease rate possible, to provide the least amount of concessions possible. And so everything you say in that conversation, in that initial call, everything you say can and will be used against you in that negotiation. So you're like, hey, I live right behind, or my kid goes to school down the road. I shop here on the weekends. I love this. You've just killed your posture. And
yeah, right, exactly. Right.
And so you just need to be careful. Do not call properties on your own. You want to have the right game plan and strategy, and have a team of advisors. Like Eric was talking about earlier, it's not just an agent, it's not just a broker, but it's a good team of advisors that are all helping you and pointing you in the right direction.
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, that is, you said it a couple of times. I will absolutely second that. Y'all, whatever you're doing, do not call listing agents. Understand who their fiduciary responsibility is. And once again, like Ken, that's why we've come to connect and collaborate and experience such amazing results with CARR, right? Is the shared mission and vision, and serving doctors get into ownership, serving doctors making the most of their practice. What an amazing conversation, Ken. So, but before we go, how can folks connect with you if they want to continue the conversation, maybe learn a little bit more? I know you're big in LinkedIn.
Yeah, you can reach out to me, DM me right here on LinkedIn. You can get all my information on our CARR website. I'm on the CARR website, and my cell phone and email and all that's there, as well as our entire team's information. But would be honored to have a conversation about whether you're starting up, you're looking at relocating, you might be a multi-site office and you're looking at expanding and where should we be looking next, or how can we run some patient-based heat maps, or I need some information about how we can grow efficiently or whatever. So no matter what stage you're at in practice ownership, we can definitely provide some insight.
Yeah, Ken, I tell you, man, what a really, really remarkable episode here. Thank you so much. But bigger than that, thank you all for what you guys are doing over at CARR. Again, we've had some incredible collaborations with you all, working with doctors across the country at all stages of their practice life cycle, and can actually I can absolutely attest to the results that CARR delivers. And on that note, really, really excited and grateful that CARR is a founding sponsor of our upcoming live event, Business Builder, Pathways to Success for Modern ECPs. So y'all actually, I believe, Ken, I think you had a conflict, but I know you guys are going to have another senior representative from CARR joining us for the day, live in New York City, actually going to be giving a workshop all about this. So come one, come all, join us at Business Builder, create your plan to optimize that right location, and then can certainly get you in touch with a CARR agent there in your local market. Well, Ken Jorgenson from CARR Realty, thank you again for joining us here at Akrinos Access for healthcare real estate for modern ECPs. How you can maximize, optimize your location and lease. And yeah, for our viewers out there, hope you found this valuable. You can find more great practice management tips and business insights like this at Akrinos.com. Subscribe to the Akrinos YouTube channel and follow us on the socials. Ken, on behalf of all of us here at Akrinos, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Access.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, man. We'll see you soon.
See you.